My youngest daughter, Maddie, came to me and she said, "Mum, I just don't want to eat animals anymore. I want to be vegetarian."
What was your daughter's reason for saying no to meat?
She's absolute huge animal lover. Most children really love animals. When they start realizing that is where the meat comes from, or start thinking, not sure I want to do that. Parents are often worried about their children's protein intake, especially if they're plant-based. They often say to me, how are they going to get enough protein? Toddlers go through something called food neophobia phase, which is fear of new foods. When you start introducing solids, those iron stores are starting to decrease. That's why iron is priority nutrient. Sometimes say to parents, a small portion of ice cream or a little bit of yogurt or something, just put it all together. And then parents will sometimes say, but won't they eat the dessert first? They might do. Sometimes you find that children just need something to get them started with the meal. Or if they feel like, okay, it's there and I'm allowed to have it in any order, just sort of takes away that controlling aspect.
Okay, so why plant-based kids? What's the story behind starting this company of yours?
Yeah, sure. So my name's Paula. I'm a dietitian and I've got 2 children myself. They're teens now. So a couple of years ago, it was about 3.5 years ago now, my youngest daughter, Maddie, came to me and she said, "Mum, I just don't want to eat animals anymore. I want to be vegetarian." So I was like, okay, this is totally fine. And I wasn't too surprised to be honest, because just a few things in the months before that she'd sort of been saying, and she was never much of a huge kind of meat fan anyhow, just in general in our meals. So that started things off and started me thinking, okay, this is great, but with my dietitian hat on, need to make sure she's getting everything she needs. She was about 10 years old at the time, sort of going into like a really rapid growth spurt and things like that. So it sort of got me thinking, okay, and so we sort of sat down together. I've got loads of recipe books. We started looking at recipe books and sort of having a bit of fun with it. And we spoke about, the variety and all that sort of thing. So that's where it sort of started. And from there, I started researching and looking at things on my own a little bit more, and started realizing that actually there isn't that much info out there for families. So there's loads of, delicious vegan and vegetarian recipes out there, plant-based recipes, wonderful recipe books, but, mainly aimed at adults, and not much speaking about sort of families and how you can include your children and maybe some extra considerations you need to sort of take into account and things like that. So it got me sort of thinking that, and also in my practice, in my nutrition practice, I had started getting quite a lot of families coming to ask me about these sort of things. So I started realizing that sort of both personally and professionally, those sort of things collided, and that there wasn't that much information out there from, sort of credible, reliable, evidence-based sources that's also practical for families. So decided to put a platform together on Instagram. So that's when I started Plant-Based Kids. Yeah.
Amazing. What was your daughter's reason for saying no to meat? What was it? Did she have a trigger moment? Or
Yeah, I think thinking back now, I mean, like I said, she's never been hugely keen on meat, but she's an absolute huge animal lover. She wants to be a vet. She's really into animals, and ever since she was a really small child, she would always be the child that sort of picked up the tiny little bee that's wing was broken or something, and sort of collect it and want to like nurse everything back to health. And I think one of the things that prompted it was we were on holiday and she saw her cousin like gutting a fish. And she really wanted to watch this. And I did say to her, it's might be a bit kind of, a bit gory, or, are you sure you want to watch? And she was like, yeah, no, I definitely want to watch. And I think she just started, it sounds so obvious, but she just started making those connections, I'm not sure I want to eat those things that have been swimming or running around, before. And so, I think that was her motivation, coming from the sort of love of animals side of things.
And how did she tell you?
She just sort of came out with it one day. So that when we were on holiday that day, she saw that fish being gutted, and then that evening we obviously cooked that fish and we served it, and she didn't want to eat the fish that night. And I said to my husband, I don't think she's going to want to eat fish ever again. And she just came to me in the kitchen one day and I was cooking and said, Mum, I've decided I want to be vegetarian. And she just, she was just really strong about it. Like her decision was, she definitely made that decision.
How did you know she was never fond of meat? Like, what? I know you said she's an animal lover, but how did she vocalize her sort of potential concerns around meat?
Yeah, sure. She hadn't vocalized it probably that much before then. She just generally, when I was cooking, I could see that she, if I did serve something that was meat, she wasn't really that keen on it. She would maybe rather eat the rest of the meal. She would seem to enjoy more of the rest of the meal. And I mean, she would still eat the meat, but it was she was a bit more reluctant to eat things. She's always liked the taste of chicken, but other meats she has never really been that keen on those sort of tastes and stuff. So, and I think it's the texture, and I think a lot of children do struggle with the texture of meat. And then also I think when they get a bit older, that sort of age, she was around about 10. They're questioning a lot of things around them, a lot of things that are going on in the world, or a lot of discussions about things that are going on in the world. And I think they just start sort of thinking about things and maybe making more of their own decisions and stuff. Yeah.
Well, I've got an interesting stat in front of me where I saw a survey in the UK of around 8% of 5 to 16-year-olds follow a vegan diet, with 15% wanting to stop eating animals. And I thought that was really interesting.
Yeah. I think I've seen that survey. It's really interesting. And I think children naturally do sort of veer towards towards that, because most children really love animals and have that sort of affinity with animals. And then I think when they start realizing that is where the meat comes from and things like that, then they maybe start questioning or start thinking, I'm not sure I want to do that. I think it's quite a sort of natural thing to question it with children.
Well, can babies and children follow a plant-based diet?
Yeah. Yes, absolutely. Yeah, they can. So a lot of...
and that's quite a broad question.
Yeah, it's a broad question. Yeah. So a lot of parents get are worried or sort of think, a lot of parents that approach me, they might have been plant-based for many years themselves, and then they are maybe starting a family and thinking, okay, we would like to, raise our child in the same way and eating the same things, but not sure if it's appropriate and all that sort of thing. So I think it's really good for parents to speak to a professional, and get some advice around it. But it's definitely possible. It's definitely possible for babies and young children to be plant-based. And plant-based could mean vegan for some families, so like 100% plant-based, or there's no sort of universally agreed kind of definition for plant-based. So the British Nutrition Foundation talks about plant-based diets being eating patterns that have more of an emphasis on plants. So that's quite sort of broad, and there could be different interpretations different people have. So it kind of depends what people mean by plant-based.
Well, let's assume a vegan diet for this scenario.
Yeah, sure.
And let's assume this is a more of a selfish question for me. Let's assume a vegan diet. What do you need to be careful of for babies, toddlers, and children?
Yeah.
What from a nutrition and then potentially a supplementation perspective?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, absolutely. So there definitely are a few things nutritionally that you need to consider if babies and young children are vegan. So just thinking generally about young children's nutrition. So when you're introducing solids to babies, first of all, when they're having their first lot of foods, one of the most important things nutritionally, one of the most important nutrients, really, really critical nutrient is iron. And this is for all, for all babies, no matter what sort of eating pattern that they're going to be introduced to. Iron is a really, really critical nutrient. So that is one of the priorities when you're introducing solids in terms of thinking about what foods do I need to include. So there are plenty of iron-rich sources, plant-based sources, food sources. But yeah, that is one of the things that I spend a lot of time talking to parents about is introducing iron-rich foods to their babies. And the reason that it is such a critical nutrient. So first of all, it has loads of different roles in the body. So I'm sure everyone recognizes iron as being part of our red blood cells, the hemoglobin in our red blood cells, transport oxygen around the body. Iron is also important for the brain, for the immune system, for lots and lots of different things going on in the body. So it's really, really important for children's learning and cognition as well. So and what happens, babies who are born full term and a good birth weight, they are born with enough iron stores to last them around about 6 months or so. And so when you start introducing solids, those iron stores are starting to deplete, starting to decrease. And so that's why iron is such an important priority nutrient when you're starting solids, because those levels are starting to decrease. And breast milk doesn't contain much iron because babies just don't need very much in those first few months when they are breastfeeding or formula feeding. So from from around about 6 months, that is when they need more iron. So iron is definitely one of the things to think about. And in terms of plant-based sources of iron, there are lots and lots of different sources. So things like beans, lentils, pulses, all of those, tofu, and then also iron-fortified cereals, and also things like nuts and seeds, obviously nut butters or ground nuts for babies and young children. And then some of the green vegetables are also quite good sources of iron as well, and some of the grains as well. So it's thinking about, and I help parents to sort of think about how they're going to introduce these foods in a form that's okay for babies. So if that's sort of mashing the beans or lentils down, or making them into like a finger food with some like mashed potato or something like that, to make it in a form that babies can pick up for themselves.
And what do they need? Is there any considerations for supplements? Or
yeah, sure. So
can you get everything from?
Yeah, so that's a really great question. So I'll come back to some other nutrients that are really important to think about. Yeah, but supplements are important. So all breastfed babies in the UK, we recommend that breastfed babies. This is whether mum is plant-based or not, or if the child's going to be plant-based when they start solids, have a vitamin D supplement from birth, vitamin D drops, and then vitamins A, C, and D from 6 months of age. So that's for all breastfed babies. Formula-fed don't need those vitamin supplements because the formula is supplemented already. It's only when they're drinking less than 500 mils that they start needing supplement. And then for plant-based babies, there are a few additional supplements that are recommended. So vitamin B12 is definitely kind of top of the list. So we know that vitamin B12, there are no reliable plant-based sources unless a food is fortified. And so from when a baby starts on solids, so from around about, and when they start taking slightly less of their milk feeds, so whether that's formula or breast milk, so I usually recommend from around 7 to 8 months or so to start a vitamin B12 supplement with vegan babies. And that vitamin B12 is so important. We only need really small quantities, like microgram quantities, but it's really, really important for our nervous system, for the blood cells. And so it's really a really, really important vitamin. And so we need to make sure that the babies are definitely having enough. So I recommend a vitamin B12 supplement, and also for breastfeeding mums. So obviously before that age, before earlier in their life, that babies will be getting the B12 that they need from mum.
Oh, so how does it make a difference if the mum is plant-based or not? Does that determine anything?
Yeah, so if a mum is breastfeeding and she's plant-based, then these supplements like vitamin B12, we'd also recommend for the breastfeeding mum as well, because that's her milk is essentially providing that for the baby before they're having foods. Yeah. So vitamin B12 is definitely one that I'd recommend on top of the vitamins A, C, and D. And then there's two others that I think are important as well. And those are iodine and then DHA, one of the omega-3 fats. So iodine is a mineral, and it's not often spoken about. I think that when people think about dairy or people not having dairy, calcium obviously is the first thing everyone thinks about, understandably. But another really important nutrient when children aren't having dairy is iodine, because the sources of iodine in the UK diet generally are from fish, whitefish, shellfish, and dairy. So those are and a little bit in eggs as well. So those are the main sources of iodine. So obviously, completely plant-based diet, you won't be getting any of those sources. So from around about a year of age, we recommend an iodine supplement as well. So to make things easier, so parents are probably thinking, oh my gosh, there's all these sort of supplements to think about. The Vegan Society last year came out with a new supplement for babies and toddlers, which is brilliant. So Vegan Society has had the Veg 1 supplement for adults for many years. And then last year they brought out a liquid version of that's got the appropriate amounts of vitamins and minerals for babies and toddlers. So it's a great one if people are looking for a sort of all-round supplement that's got the right amount of vitamins as well as the iodine. The other nutrient to think about that I mentioned is DHA, which is one of the omega-3 fats. So, normally if people are eating a diet that includes animal products, fish, oily fish particularly, are a really good source of DHA. So DHA has got this really long name, docosahexaenoic acid. So that's why we just shorten it to DHA. And it's one of the fats, one of the essential fats, one of the omega-3 fats. I don't want to get too sciencey, but just quickly to explain to people, just for the context. So DHA is the sort of end product, and before that, a number of steps before that, there's what we call the precursor fat, which also has a long name, but we'll just call it ALA. It's alpha-linolenic acid. So ALA, there are lots and lots of plant-based sources of that particular fat. So your chia seeds, hemp seeds, flax seeds, walnuts, and like flaxseed oil, things like that, are really good sources of that ALA or the sort of precursor fat. And that's what we call an essential fat, because our bodies can't make that fat themselves, so we have to get it from the food that we eat. But what is not clear from the research is how much of that ALA gets converted down to DHA, which is sort of the active form, and DHA is present in really high quantities in baby's brain, and it's really important for brain and eye development. So we know that it's really, really important. We know that you can get the ALA sources from plant foods, but we don't know how much of it, how efficiently that is converted to that DHA. So we do recommend for children under the age of 2, so babies and children under the age of 2, and also pregnant women and breastfeeding women, that they supplement with DHA, this particular fat, because we know it has so many important roles in the body. For older children and adults, it's not really that clear from the research whether they definitely do need to supplement. Some people like to supplement just to keep it going, might as well. There don't seem to be any downsides to taking it. And other people feel that they'll have the they'll include loads of chia seeds, flax seeds, walnuts, etc. And so we're not really, the research isn't clear that sort of everyone needs to take that supplement if they're not eating oily fish. But we know in under twos, it's really, really important.
That's really interesting. I didn't actually know that because I've since I've gone vegan, I've been buying more vegan algae oil to supplement with for my EPA DHA.
Yes, that's right.
But about 3 months ago, it ran out. And I just didn't bother reordering it. A couple of weeks ago, I said to my friend who's also vegan, I said, do you still take omega-3? He said, yeah, I do. I said, do you think I should? He said, well, it's not going to do you harm.
Yeah.
But it's like one of those things where you don't want to look back in 60 years and be like, oh, I should have probably taken it.
I probably should have taken it. I mean, the only thing that I would say is that it is a bit of a barrier for many families is it is quite expensive in terms of a supplement. Like vitamin B12 and the vitamin supplements and the VH1, the from the Vegan Society, it's incredibly well priced and it is really, really reasonable. But the DHA, EPA supplements tend to be a little bit more. And so that can be a bit tricky for families. But I would say for under twos, we definitely know it's important. And then after that, if you include lots of the ALA sources that.
And when would you start for the under twos?
So I would generally start, it's another one that they can get from breast milk as well. If mum would need to be supplementing if she was plant-based as well. And so I generally say definitely by a year of age, because by that time, babies are quite well established on food, and even if they're still breastfeeding, which is wonderful, which is fantastic, they won't be drinking quite as much by the time they're a year of age, as opposed to a few months earlier. So I would definitely say by about a year of age. But if you started it a little bit earlier, 9-10 months, that's also fine. But I would definitely say by a year, yeah.
Are there any more considerations of things to be careful of if you're raising vegan babies and children?
So those are those are the main things. So definitely supplement wise, those are the main things. And then we were talking all about iron. And one of the other things that I think is really, really important, again, this is for all young children, but is just making sure that babies and young children are getting enough fats, because many of the plant-based foods are naturally quite low in fat. So beans, lentils, many of those foods are pretty low in fat and good source of fiber, which is great for us as adults. But for children, they really need quite concentrated energy and nutrient dense sources of food. So obviously nuts, nut butters, ground nuts are a fantastic source of fat. So really encourage parents to include plenty of those sorts of things, seeds, seed butters, ground seeds, and then if they can, things like avocado and using olive oil to roast vegetables, and basically not being afraid of fats, sort of including them in your little ones' food, because they really have quite high calorie needs, and they eat quite small quantities of food. So we want to make sure that is really nutrient dense.
How do you gauge the calorie needs for a child?
Yeah, that's a really great question. So children are actually really good at regulating their own appetite. So babies are particularly really good at this. So when babies are breastfed, they will just feed until they've had enough, and then they will just stop feeding. Or if you are bottle feeding, as long as you're doing sort of paced bottle feeding, so, letting children have a little break and, not necessarily making them finish a particular amount in a bottle. They are good at just sort of stopping, turning away, telling you they've had enough. And again, when you introduce solids, parents understandably always ask me, how much should my 7-month-old be eating? How much should my 9-month-old be eating? Things like that. And we actually don't have sort of very clear or sort of, portion guides for under ones, just because all babies are just so, so different. And what we really, really encourage parents to do is to try and look at the cues that your baby is giving you, to see if they still want more, if they've had enough. And their milk feeds, their breast feeds or formula feeds are still really, really important part of their nutrition throughout their first year of life and beyond as well, but particularly in their first year of life. So when you first start solids, the emphasis is really not on the volume of food that they're eating. It's more on the tastes, the textures, just getting used to something that's not a liquid. All they're used to is that sort of liquid previous to that. And so it's a new experience for them. They're learning skills, so many skills, feeding skills, what the food feels like, what it looks like, sort of bringing it up to their mouth, lots of things going on there. So babies and children will usually give you quite clear signals that they've had enough. If they're sort of leaning forwards, opening their mouth, reaching for things, they're interested, they're engaged, they're still happy they want more, they're giving you those sort of signs. If they're sort of clamping their mouth shut, turning their head away, pushing you away, crying, obviously, things like that, they're trying to tell you that they've had enough. So, so I think it's a difficult one for parents, and I understand as well. I've got children as well, because some days your children may eat loads and you think, oh, it's brilliant. They're doing so well, they're eating so well. And then on another day, it might just take a few bites or a few mouthfuls and then they don't want any more. And so I think that can be confusing for parents. But I think if you know, and you know what to expect, that some days the appetite will vary. Some days they might eat lots, other days they won't eat, and just trying to sort of trust them and go with that, then they'll be able to regulate their own intake. Yeah.
So there's no like protein minimums, fat minimums to consider. For adults, we think we need to hit a minimum protein target,
Sure.
especially protein. Is there any considerations for that for babies, toddlers, or children?
Yeah, sure. So we have nutritional requirements that we know babies and children need. How much for example iron or protein that they need. But obviously we don't expect and don't want parents to be sort of like measuring things out or anything, because that just takes away from the enjoyment, and also children exploring food and things like that. But parents are often, actually protein is a good one, because a good one to talk about, because parents are often really, really worried about their children's protein intake, especially if they're plant-based. They often say to me, oh, how are they going to get enough protein? And actually young children don't need very much protein. So toddlers only need about 15 grams of protein a day. And most toddlers eat much more than that, sort of more double or more than that. So there hasn't been a huge amount of research on sort of vegan children's nutrition, but over the last few years, sort of the last 4 or so years, there's starting to more research is starting to come out. And there was a great study out of Germany called the Vici study, and they had more than 100 children in each group, so vegan group, vegetarian group, and omnivore group, and they looked at young children, 1 to 3 year olds, and then also had another age group, 6 to 18 year olds. And in the young group, the 1 to 3 year olds, they found that the protein intake of all the groups was more than double what the sort of reference amount was. So even in the vegan group, they were having, I think it was 2.4 times what was sort of recommended. The vegetarian group, I think it was 2.5, and the omnivorous group, they did eat the most protein, but eating lots and lots of protein. So the amount that they were eating was fine, even though it was more than the sort of minimum kind of thing. It wasn't huge amounts, but I think what I'm trying to say is that it's very easy for children to eat enough protein, and parents are often really, really worried about protein, but it's usually not a sort of concern for young children. Yeah.
One thing you said was babies are really good at regulating their appetite and general food intake. As adults, as we get older, it becomes a big problem, and a lot of adults struggle with food portions.
Yeah.
At what point do you see that amazing intuitive ability? Because very few adults have that intuitive regulation. When do you, in your experience, when do you see kids starting to, I don't want to say collect baggage so that they can no longer intuitively eat, but it is effectively, food becomes an emotional crutch for people, becomes a habit, becomes a routine, or whatever the association is. When do you see that starting, they lose that
Yeah,
spark?
that's a really interesting question. I would say definitely under 5 seem to have this sort of very intuitive sort of way of eating. And they're often interested in doing other things, going off to play or, be with their friends or whatever. And they just quickly eat a little bit and however much that is, that seems to be enough for them. And then they go off and play. I think, but to caveat that as well, it really depends on, I think, the family and the family dynamics, like the relationship that parents have with food, their own relationship with food. So, if parents have been brought up maybe in a family where they were told they have to finish everything on their plate, or maybe grandparents, going back a few generations, if it was a time when, there wasn't much food around, so it was really, you can't waste your food, you have to finish it. And I think then you start sort of overriding and not listening to when you've actually had enough. And I think some children who, especially as they get a bit older, who eat very, very fast, there is some research coming out now about the speed at which we eat. It sounds kind of obvious, but slowing down eating can really, really help in terms of really trying to tune in to think about, how much you've had. And there's no ways I've done things perfectly, that's for sure. But I've always tried to say to my children, you don't have to finish what you have on your plate. Just eat as much as, or as little or as much as you want, or you can have more if you want after. And so I think it's probably in under 5s, they definitely have that sort of, seem to have that really kind of intuitive way. And then I'm not sure there is a sort of age where it kind of switches, but I think it's just sort of the setup being that food is available, so like it's not scarce, but also that that there's this expectation that or there isn't an expectation that you have to finish whatever's on your plate. You just try, if you've had enough, if you feel you've had enough. And sometimes it's really hard as a parent, because I remember times, I can remember times when my girls like really haven't eaten very much, and I'll say to them, are you sure you've had enough? And like, yeah, I'm sure I've had enough. Like, okay. And then I think it's just trying to really trust and so sort of not have that controlling sort of trying to sort of get children to eat more, when if they say they've had enough, even if you think they've only taken 2 bites or whatever, if that's enough for them at that particular time, then it's just sort of trying to go with that and let them decide.
Because oftentimes kids are rewarded for finishing their plate, right? That's that sort of the standard sort of story. Oh, well done for finishing your food. Yeah. Do you think there's actually damaging repercussions for that?
Potentially. I mean, I think we shouldn't use food as a reward. So, we shouldn't be sort of saying, if you eat your broccoli, you can have some ice cream or something like that. That using food in a sort of a reward type of way. But you're right. A lot of the time, you hear people, and it's a natural thing to sort of say, oh, well done, you finished your food. But yeah, I guess it is that sort of thinking about it's just, I think, trying to get that message across that you don't have to finish everything that's there. We always try and I always try and speak to parents about sort of trying to put food on a sort of level playing field. That if you sort of offer the ice cream only on condition that they eat the broccoli, then it makes the ice cream seem like this most attractive thing ever, and the broccoli seem like, oh, that's just like this awful thing you have to eat to get the other thing. Whereas if it's just kind of all food, and it's not like you have to eat that in order to get that. So sometimes if children are sort of really being quite like they just can't eat or focus on their food. It's just always this thought of the pudding the whole time. Then I sometimes say to parents, why don't you put the dessert? You can decide, you can just have a really small amount. It doesn't have to be like this huge ice cream tub or something, but, a small portion of ice cream or a little bit of yogurt or something. Just put it all together at the same time. And then parents sometimes say, oh, but won't they eat the dessert first? They might do. But if it's just a small dessert, then they might just go to the other food. And sometimes we find that children just need something to sort of get them started with the meal. Or if they feel like it's there, I can have it, I'm allowed to have it in any order, then it just sort of takes away that sort of controlling aspect. So yeah, it's a sort of often called family style meals, which can work really well for families, where you sort of put the food plates, bowls, pots and pans kind of on the table, and then having everyone sort of dish up what they would like and how much they would like of different things. So as the parent, you decide what is going to be available, and then the children decide how much of each particular thing that they want. So it can be quite a good way of, if you've got one child is really fussy, or someone is vegetarian, someone isn't, you can have a few different options on the table. You can have some plain pasta that most of your children will eat, or something like that, and you can have various sort of sides or toppings to go with it, and that can take the sort of stress away from out of meal times. That sort of battle of like, just eat this, or can you have one more bite? Or
it's a good experiment for adults. I think I like the idea of giving everyone dessert to start with.
Yeah. And also say to parents, there's this sort of feeding philosophy by this lady called Ellen Satter, and it's called the division of responsibility. And it's us as parents, we have a role to play, and our sort of jobs or roles in terms of the meal, and then children have their roles or their jobs. And the idea is that as the parent, you decide what's on offer for the options that are available, when the food's going to be served. So you set the schedule in terms of meals and snacks, and where it's going to be served. So if you having the meal at the table, or if you're having a picnic outside or something like that. And then the children decide, their job or their role is to decide how much and if they're going to eat. But the options that are available on the table are those are the options. Like, it's not giving children like something completely different if they don't want. So you can cater a little bit for children in terms of be considerate in terms of, your one child, doesn't eat, or is really selective, or only eats certain things, or, is a bit still learning to like certain foods. So you can have something that that they would go for, something that's, maybe some plain rice or some bread or something like that. And then if it's on their terms, in terms of what else that they choose, it may really surprise you that things that they actually choose.
One thing you mentioned earlier was the parents' relationship with food can impact the child's relationship with food. What do you think the relationship between nature and nurture is when it comes to not only a child's relationship with food, but also their preferences?
Yeah. So that's a really great question. So we do know that some children we know that many toddlers go through periods of being fussy, and it's sort of part of their development. And I think if parents think that's, or have, or know, or sort of expect, okay, they likely will go through a fussy phase. That's to be expected. It's sort of part of then they won't sort of panic or be a bit sort of shocked, like, oh my gosh, they're actually starting to refuse food. So for most toddlers, they do go through a fussy phase. But there has been some research showing that there are actually some genetic links in terms of fussiness. So the sort of how fussy a child is, or how selective they are with their eating. And then often when I'm speaking to parents, they say, oh yeah, when I was younger, I hardly ate anything, or I would only eat these foods, or my mum told me I was really, really fussy. So there is, to a certain extent, there can be a genetic link, but that doesn't mean that there's sort of, that's it, that there's nothing we can do or anything like that. So I think there is a certain amount where some children seem to be more sort of predisposed to being fussier than others. But then I think it's definitely, there's a lot of nurture as well. So trying to not, I know this is really difficult for a lot of people, but trying to recognize if you do have a relationship with food, in terms of if you're a person where if you're upset, you turn to food, or if you're sad, you turn to food, or, trying to recognize, okay, this is what I'm doing, and obviously try and get some help and speak to someone about that, because I think children do pick up on those things definitely. If you're feeling anxious and you turn towards food, or if they start thinking, if I'm anxious, that's sort of what I should do, or if I'm angry, or if I'm sad, or turning to food to sort of help with emotions and things. So I think there's definitely a nurture element there. But it's not easy. It's not straightforward, that's for sure.
No, but it's a huge impetus for us adults to work on our relationship with food to help the next generation. Otherwise, you can just pass this quite debilitating thing on across generations.
Yeah, definitely. And I think, children pick up on so many things, and they, parents wouldn't necessarily be doing this, on purpose or anything. But I think it's something that children could definitely pick up on.
One thing you've mentioned quite a bit so far is fussiness. I never really appreciated what fussy eating was until I've become a parent, and I tune into a bit more of what is it? What is fussy eating? And
okay.
And it sounds like something you come across a lot.
Well, it is really common in toddlers. So it's basically, there's no sort of, there's no like sort of definite or sort of recognized definition. So some people say picky eating, fussy eating, being choosy or selective about. I think selective is probably the best sort of or sort of most neutral kind of term, because sort of fussy or picky, it has a bit of a negative sort of connotation, doesn't it? But it's essentially, a lot of toddlers go through that phase, and it's part of their development. So when toddlers get to about a year, 18 months of age, that sort of age, typically, it's very typical for them to go through a period of sort of refusing foods that they previously liked, or sort of being very wary or suspicious of new foods, sort of looking at things, not really wanting to try, and things like that. And part of it is, there are lots of things going on at that time, which sort of means that it's more likely for this to happen. So toddlers go through something called food neophobia phase, which is neophobia is a fear of new foods. So, which is kind of a part of their development. So we think it's where it came from, or sort of where it stems from, is, many years ago, thousands of years ago, tens of thousands of years ago, we were when children start walking, so become mobile, crawling and walking, they could potentially pick up plants, foods, things that were lying around that if we were just, out in the wild, that could be poisonous. And so it's thought to be a sort of evolutionary type of thing, that protective type of thing, supposed to be to try and prevent children picking up sort of poisonous foods and things. But obviously in our modern world, we don't live like that anymore, and we don't sort of generally have poisonous things lying around. But that's sort of where it sort of stems from. And we also know with toddlers that their growth rate slows down. So first year of life, babies grow rapidly. So it's, first 12 months is a time of really, really rapid growth. You got a little girl who's 6 weeks now. I'm sure even in 6 weeks, you've seen how much she's grown already. It's incredible, isn't it? So their first year of life, babies generally, on average, triple their birth weight, grow about 25 centimeters in length. And I think this is amazing, that they actually double their brain size.
Wow.
So all within the first 12 months. So obviously they need a lot of nutrition for that. They generally are very hungry, and they have really good appetite. And then over a year of age, sort of in the second, third year of life, through childhood, children are obviously still growing, but they're just their rate of growth is not as rapid. And so in the toddler years, they generally don't have as much of a sort of hunger drive. And then on top of that, they've got this sort of food neophobia where they get a bit sort of suspicious of food. And then on top of that, they're developing, they're learning to walk, they're learning to talk, they start saying no, they start becoming more independent. So I think it's like a sort of collision of all of these things, which makes them more likely to maybe start refusing foods. But I think if parents understand this and appreciate and sort of think, almost expect it, then it's like, oh, okay, this is just sort of part of their development. It's not anything, but if you don't know it, it can be quite alarming. And you think, oh, my 18-month-old is not eating as much as when they were like 9 months old. But is actually quite normal because their growth rate slows and things. So I think it can be, if parents know this and they're sort of armed with that information and some sort of strategies, then they can, feel a bit more relaxed about it.
And you should be okay letting them eat whatever they like, so long as it's nutritious, or?
Yeah, so in terms of the amounts, definitely letting them be the sort of lead in terms of how much they eat. So as parents, I was talking about the sort of division of responsibility. So I think what's really important with toddlers is to have like a really good routine. And often parents say to me, my child eats so much better at nursery than they do at home. And one of the reasons, I believe, is because nurseries usually have like a really good schedule, their routine. They have their meal, snack, they have nap time at a certain time, they have their routine, their playtime. And I think toddlers really thrive when there's a sort of snack and meal and snack routine. And that means that also that children can build up a bit of hunger. So not being allowed to sort of graze throughout the day, I don't generally recommend that, because then children sort of start losing that ability to feel hungry, eat something, feel satisfied, go off and play, and then feel hungry again. If they're grazing sort of throughout the day, then they might not sort of feel those sort of hunger cues. But I think parents get a bit worried if their child's sort of always coming to them saying, "Oh, I'm hungry," or "I want a snack," and it's actually okay sometimes to say no, like it's not snack time yet.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
Let's just play a bit more or whatever, and leaving at least sort of about 2 or 3 hours, depending on the age of the child. But generally, toddlers need something to eat around about every 2.5 to 3 hours. So if you sort of can schedule and more or less your routine, then that can really help in terms of offering those meals and snacks. Yeah.
So snacks are good for kids, or? I say good for kids. I mean, it's okay to snack?
Definitely, I think it's okay to snack. So for babies under the age of 12 months, we generally don't recommend snacks because they just don't really need it. They're still having milk feeds. Their milk feeds generally are their sort of snack in between, and then they're offered 3 meals. Over the age of 1, parents can start introducing some snacks, so like mid-morning or mid-afternoon. And so, yeah, generally for toddlers, 3 meals and 2 snacks works quite well. I mean, obviously every child is slightly different, but I would definitely say that, snacks are appropriate and fine to offer. And just try and leave a bit of a gap between the sort of meal and snacks, so that they can feel hungry again. But I think snacks are really appropriate for toddlers. Yeah.
Circling back to plant-based diets,
Yeah.
how would you help transition a child into a plant-based diet? But the problems that are arising are that the children only want to eat like corn products or like the sort of fake stuff.
Okay. Yeah.
This was inspired by a question from one of my team.
Yeah. Okay.
So I assume it's a personal question.
Yeah. Sure. So like for an older, slightly older child. Maybe?
Yeah. So have you got any tips for transitioning a child who's only it's a little bit older child, who's only having the corn products, the meat products, etc.
The meat alternatives, things like that. Yeah. Okay. I mean, I think it's a really great question, and I think the meat alternatives can have a place in, within a vegan diet. And obviously, they could be made from corn, so like the mycoprotein, the mushroom protein, or you get soya products, pea protein products, things like that. So one of the things I would look at is trying to see how much salt it contains, because often these products can be really high in salt. So like the sort of sausage burger type versions have usually got, every product's different, but have usually got more salt than like the mince products, for example. So I would say including some corn mince would be absolutely fine. But sure, if they only wanted to go for the sort of fake stuff, I would say try and, so depending on the age of the child, but try and involve them in maybe sort of a little menu plan or sort of meal plan, what we're going to do, what we're going to have for the week. And it just takes a little, it doesn't have to take a lot of time, but like a little bit of time, 10 minutes or so on a Sunday or one day in the week, trying to sort of sit down and maybe look at a few recipe books, see what you can include, and sort of try and get them a little bit sort of engaged and maybe involved in it a little bit. So if they feel a bit more involved in the process, maybe they would be more willing to try a few other things. Cooking together with children is also a really, really great idea. A similar sort of thing, getting them involved and engaged. And then also I would say, it doesn't have to be a sort of straight away swap. So maybe if you sort of, as a family, are sort of wanting to include more plants, but are not totally plant-based yet, but wanting to sort of move in that direction, maybe trying some sort of familiar meals that they're really used to, maybe like a spaghetti bolognese or something, and in replacing like half the meat with some lentils or something, or using like the corn mince or something. So sort of maybe trying out some meals that are sort of familiar and sort of slowly changing them instead of maybe a sort of straight swap where it might feel sort of too different for them.
So you include, like, you may include some of the meat alternatives, but half the plate may be corn mince, half of it may be lentils.
Yeah,
they may not be able to tell what's going on, and then you slowly reduce it.
Yeah, something like that. So you could, exactly, include some lentils with the mince, and also try and ask them, I guess, the things that they are wanting to eat, or things that they maybe that they miss or something like that, and maybe you could make some versions that are similar to that, or things like that. I think that the main thing is trying to engage them and sort of include them. I never used to do meal plans, so being a dietitian, it sounds awful, but years ago I knew I had stuff in the freezer or my store cupboard, and it was like, okay, I know I can just throw something together. But in the last couple of years, I actually have started meal planning, and I've found it so much easier just to know what you are having, or have a basic plan. Obviously, you can change things around from one day to the next, but knowing that I have the food in the cupboard that I need for what I'm going to make. And I just spend about 10 minutes on a Sunday sort of trying to do that. And I try and ask my girls, okay, is there anything that you want this week? Or, is there anything that I've been making too much that you don't want me to include, or things like that. And so I think trying to get them sort of a bit invested in it can really help, so that they feel like part of the sort of process, and they've had some choice, some say in it.
If you're raising a vegan child and there's also quite a lot of allergies, potentially soy, potentially nuts, how do you ensure that they are getting a balanced diet?
Yeah, that can be really tricky. So I see a lot of allergy families, and it can be really, really tricky depending on how many allergies they have. So if it's a vegan family and the child has got an allergy to soya and all the tree nuts and peanuts and maybe lentils or something like that, it might be quite challenging to actually make sure that they're getting a balance of everything. And obviously, I would never say to a family that they have to include something animal-based, but it might be a discussion in terms of, okay, how are we going to try and get that variety? What other and involving the allergy team as well, because sometimes people are avoiding things just in case, or because they're a bit scared that they might be allergic to it because they're allergic to something similar, you know. So it might be a case of getting the allergy team involved and maybe challenging certain foods. So for example, lentils, peanuts are actually not a nut; they're actually a legume. So often parents are worried that if the child's allergic to peanuts, that they might be allergic to other legumes. So they might be restricting things like lentils and peas or something that they don't necessarily need to. But I think those sorts of things you need to do, you need to discuss and really see. So I think it really, really depends how many allergies they have. So obviously, egg and milk allergies are really common in children, but obviously if they're vegan, they wouldn't be including those things, or they wouldn't be including those already. But if they're allergic to, you know, soya and all the tree nuts and peanuts and, you know, for example, lentils, I think it's potentially could make it really, really difficult to get enough of balance of everything.
Yeah, I guess without more context, it's a difficult answer to give.
Yeah.
One question that I've been thinking a lot about recently is, so I'm vegan. My wife is, I'd say, mostly plant-based. Different members of my family have different dietary habits. How do you approach, and we're not at the age yet where this is a concern, but one thing I worry about is, let's assume that we raise my daughter majority vegan.
Yeah.
And then they go to a family member's house and there's non-vegan food on the table.
Yeah.
How do you approach the conversation without labeling foods as good and bad? Something you mentioned earlier.
Yeah.
And you're nodding as though this is something that comes up a lot. Like, how do you approach that conversation? Because
that's tricky.
That's one I worry about, because I don't want to create bad relationships with food, but also to make her or any child feel sidelined. So how do you approach that?
Yeah. I think it's a really tricky one. So obviously, I guess it's it depends where they are or what the social situation is. You know, if trying to have a conversation with that friend or family member or whatever, so that there is a range of food there that your child can eat. So having that variety there, so they don't feel that there's like not much for them. You know, that they feel like there is enough variety for them to eat. But I had someone ask me if, you know, their child we went to a barbecue and their child wanted to try some of the pork sausage or something like that, or beef sausage or something. And I think it's, if they're old enough, at the age where you can talk to them and say, well, you know, we don't eat animal products we don't eat animals in our family. They might not know, or they might not realize that sausage, it looks different and they want to try it because it looks, or their friend says it's delicious or something like that. But they might not know where it comes from. And I think not to sort of, you know, shame that other person for what they're eating or anything, but just explaining that and if they still want to try it, I would say let them try it. But that's just my personal view. Obviously, every family should decide for themselves. But I think after having a discussion with your child, depending on how their age, and obviously making it sort of age appropriate, how you sort of talking to them about it, explaining why you don't eat meat, or you know why your family doesn't include that particular food, and then explaining that's, you know, what that food is, because often things like sausages, burgers, you know, there's no sort of context as to where it comes from, or they may not sort of realize what it comes from. And I think that's a lot of things with children, like we were saying earlier, is that they might get to a certain age where they're eating things just because that's what their family eats and that's what they're offered, so that's what they're eating. But it's when they start questioning these things or asking and sort of thinking, is that actually from that animal, or, you know, then they start sort of making those connections. So yeah, I think it's about just being really open and honest about it. And if your child still sort of really wants to try it, then I would say, yeah, let them try it and sort of decide for themselves. Obviously, as they get older, and if you've maybe been bringing them up plant-based and they get to an age, in their teens or something, and they decide they want to try something. Obviously, that's up to them. But I think it's a tricky one to navigate, isn't it?
And do you think? I mean, there's so many ways you can do this, but as a parent, is it? I don't know if better is the right word. To raise them eating everything and then let them make the decision later on, or to raise them how you eat and then let them make the decision.
Yeah.
Now, let's say how I eat is vegan.
Yeah.
Raise them vegan. Then if they at 8 years old decide, I want to eat chicken now, fine.
Yeah.
Do their thing. Or the other way around, let them eat everything and then.
Yeah, I don't think there's sort of right or wrong answer really. But I think as a family and sort of thinking about how practically you can offer those foods, if as a family you don't, there aren't any meat products around in your house or in your family, then practically it's going to be quite difficult to offer those things to your child. And I think as a child, you eat and you sort of, what your parents are eating, what your family eats. So, and there are many, obviously cultures, religions, different places around the world where they eat certain things, not for health reasons or anything, but just for cultural or religious reasons and things like that. So I think there are many different reasons to be eating different things or not eating certain things. So yeah, I really don't think there's a right or wrong there. But I would say if you, as a family, as a couple, eat a certain way, then I would say just offer the same foods to your child. Yeah.
And on that same sort of note, but more broadly speaking, how do you empower kids to eat their way when their peers may be eating differently, which may lead to some bullying, may lead to some names? Yeah.
Yeah, that's really tricky. So that can happen, if children have allergies or if they're, if their family's plant-based or something like that. So I think it's again trying to just have a conversation with those children, or maybe offer to go in and speak in their school or have some sort of or speak to the teacher about, having some event where it shows sort of, foods from different cultures or different foods that people eat, and just trying to show and be open that different people eat different things, and there's no sort of one way to eat necessarily. And maybe I suppose sometimes there's a bit of curiosity, isn't there? Like with children, sometimes they can be a bit nasty, but actually what they mean is they just want to try something, or they're not sure because maybe it looks a bit weird or something like that. So maybe just saying to them, "Oh, do you want to try it?" Or share my lunch, or something like that. That's and offer so that it becomes not this sort of strange thing. And if they try it and realize, oh, actually it tastes quite good, or then there might not be that sort of mystery around it.
During your consultations, when you're working with parents, what are some of the top 3 most frequent mistakes or areas of improvement you see in parents that they need to make?
So I think one of the main things, especially with young children, is that the thing around fats, that they often just don't offer enough fats. And with babies and young children, there's often this advice, which is fine, to start with like vegetables and stuff like that and savory food, which is absolutely fine. But then I think sometimes parents can get a bit stuck offering sort of the same thing, or if their child likes a particular thing, it's like, oh, okay, this is great, they like this, okay, I'll give it to them the same thing every day. So I think one of the main things is not giving enough variety, and not giving enough fats, like energy-rich foods. And the other thing I think is around. So that's more sort of nutrient-wise, but just in general, I think around the fact that letting children eat enough or how much they want, and parents often, understandably, because you're anxious about your child, and you're not, especially if your first child, you're not sure what to do or how much they should be eating, but just around that. Sort of trusting your baby and your child to sort of eat enough for them. And often I'm talking to parents, it's about reassurance, and that they're growing really well. That they are getting enough, even if it doesn't look necessarily like much food. It's enough for them. They're tracking on their growth charts, things like that. So I'd say, those are the sort of main things that I tend to come across.
And what are some like red flags where you're saying actually they're not doing well?
Yeah,
that this needs to work.
Yeah,
this needs
sure.
to change. Sorry.
Yeah, so particularly with plant-based families, one of the things I have seen is not using. So a child who was about they were about 2.5, I think. 2.5, 3, that sort of age. So they weren't breastfeeding anymore. They weren't on a formula or anything like that. And the family were using a dairy alternative drink that wasn't fortified with calcium, and they just weren't getting very many sources of calcium in their foods. And so I think there is this sort of belief, I guess, or I don't know what the right word is, but sometimes I come across parents who, understandably, they don't want to give their child a drink that's got like the ingredients list looks like absolutely massive, and I think, oh, it can't be healthy because it's got all these ingredients. But if those ingredients are sort of things that it's fortified with, so calcium, vitamin D, iodine, that's going to be beneficial. So I think it's some of the sort of things that parents might hear, adults might hear in the context of the adult world. So dairy alternatives that are really, really low in calories and protein, so like almond milk or hazelnut milk or like coconut milk or something like that. Those not generally not appropriate for young children. So things like drinks that aren't fortified, that is a really big red flag for me, because there are some foods that do contain calcium, things like broccoli, kale, oranges, figs. Certainly, there are beans, foods that do contain calcium. And those are all really, really healthy foods. And I always encourage parents to be giving those foods to their children, but they are not necessarily going to be eaten in the amounts that for them to get enough calcium from broccoli, let's say. So for young children, generally they need a dairy alternative drink that has got calcium added to it. Things like calcium set tofu is a fantastic source of calcium as well. So I'm not saying they need to be drinking lots and lots of cow's milk if they include that, if they're vegetarian, or they don't need to drink lots of dairy alternative. But if they're drinking something that is really, really low in calories, it's really watery, and it doesn't have any added calcium, then that's not really going to be providing much nutrition for the young child.
It's basically water.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
A couple of quick fires here as we start to wrap up. What are your and this comes from a couple of members of ours who wanted to ask. What are your go-to quick home prepped school lunches for toddlers and kids?
Okay, that's a good one. I'd say a really quick packed lunch, something like hummus wrap. So some a tortilla wrap, some hummus in there, and maybe some cucumber, some lettuce, things like that. Maybe some added chickpeas if I can get if my daughters would be keen to have that. So yeah, hummus wrap is a good one for packed lunch, and wraps tend to work quite well for sort of staying together and keeping together. Also things like leftovers from the night before. So if I've made like a pasta salad or a rice salad or something like that, orzo, I use the like little orzo pasta quite a lot. Just a simple salad with like pasta salad with some sweet corn and lentils and maybe like a nice dressing, so that it just gives it a little bit of flavor, and maybe add a little bit of dressing the next day. So leftovers are great. I always try and make sort of extra of something that I can give for the next day. So yeah, so those are my go-tos. Yeah.
And what about and the follow-up is top 3 breakfast, lunch and dinner meals? So maybe breakfast and dinner. We'll cover this one.
Okay, cool. Okay, so breakfast, overnight oats, I'm loving at the moment. It's starting to get warmer and stuff, or otherwise porridge if it's the winter, which seemed to go on forever. Overnight oats, I love that because it's so easy and it just takes like 2 minutes to prep the night before. So some oats, your milk of choice. I usually chuck some chia seeds or flax seeds or something in there as well, and then some like raspberries or blueberries or something like that. Sometimes some nut butter, or sometimes I put the nut butter on the next morning over the top, and then just in like a little jar in the fridge, and then next morning it's all ready. So, and then I might top it with some more fruit or banana and nut butter or something like that. So that's a great breakfast. I love avocado on toast as well. That in terms of like a complete meal that doesn't have that much protein. So I tend to have like a drink, like a soy milk smoothie or something with that as a breakfast. Peanut butter on toast is always a winner. That's peanut butter with banana as well. I love that. Peanut butter and banana. I think that's a really great combination. And then dinners. I'm loving at the moment, I've been making a tofu stir-fried rice, so kind of like an egg fried rice, but instead of the egg using tofu, and then any veggies you have, so like frozen peas, frozen edamame, or like some peppers, carrots, whatever you've got in the fridge, basically just chopping those up really small with some onion and with some cooked rice, and then your tofu, and smoked paprika is one of my favorite spices. So chuck a bit of that in, a bit of turmeric, and it's all in one pan, so that works really well. What other evening meals? And another really great evening meal that my kids really love, and I think so versatile is making like a lentil ragu, so like a bolognese but with lentils, and then using that, making like a really big batch, so like a double batch, and freezing some, and then you can use it, just do some pasta with it, or you can put it over a jack potato, or you can make, a sort of cottage pie with some mashed potato on top, or like a lasagna type of thing. So I think if you've got the ragu, then you can make lots of different meals, or you can sort of make it into a chili or something like that. So yeah.
What are your thoughts on the sort of pre-packaged, nicely packaged, organic meals for kids versus home-cooked foods like you just mentioned there?
Yeah. Obviously, home-cooked meals tend to contain less salt and things like that. Although if something is made specifically for toddlers, then you would hope it doesn't have much salt in it. I think there are some that are really good, and there are some that are not great. I think with some of those packaged meals, you can get some of them where the texture just doesn't seem to be what you would make at home, and it seems to be much sort of mushier and sort of softer. So sometimes I think it's not great because of the texture isn't, it doesn't give children that sort of variety in terms of textures, but obviously that depends on the food. You do get some really good ones that are like veggie sort of meatballs, or like falafel, so I think I'm not totally against having some of those convenience things around. You can't always make everything from scratch, so having some of those things in the freezer can be really good. There's 2 brands that I've worked with that have got really great plant-based meal options for toddlers. So yeah, full transparency, I have worked with them, but I've tasted their meals as well, and they are amazing. So one is called Wildly Tasty, which is completely plant-based, and they are brilliant. And then there's another one called Luna and Wild, and they do baby and toddler meals. It's not 100% plant-based, but they have got lots and lots of plant-based options within their menu, and they've really, they've consulted with a dietitian. They've really thought about the nutrition that's in their foods, and that they are really balanced and stuff. So I think there are options out there. Yeah.
What's your mission with plant-based kids?
I think my mission is to really empower parents to make sure that they feel confident with including more plants in their family's eating pattern. Basically, I want to try and get more families to eat more plants, and that doesn't have to be 100% plants, but just including more we know it's really beneficial for our health, for the health of the planet, and so I think that's my my mission, helping people to do more plants more of the time.
And if you take this back in full circle, when your daughter said to you that she doesn't want to eat meat anymore, how did it make you feel about your relationship with meat and fish?
Yeah, well, it really made me start questioning, obviously I've been a dietitian for many, many years, and I've always thought about the nutrition that I'm giving my children, but it did make me think, gosh, I haven't really thought about this from a sort of planet point of view, from a climate point of view, from the animal welfare point of view. There's all those other things that come into it. So it really it opened my eyes a lot, because although it was my one daughter who said she wanted to be a vegetarian, my older daughter, a few years before that, which I guess was the very, very start of our sort of journey, she had done a project with school, and for a whole week they were looking at sort of different aspects of climate change. And one of the days, obviously, they looked at foods and how the food that how food is produced, and how that can impact the climate change. And she came home and told us all these statistics and said, I think we should decrease the amount of red meat we're eating and the amount of dairy that we're having. And so that opened my eyes initially as well. So I think it's and I'm still learning. It's a learning curve, but it made me really think about things and sort of open my eyes. Yeah.
Amazing. Yeah. Where can people find out more about the amazing work you're doing?
Oh, brilliant. So they can find me on Instagram at plantbasedkids.uk, or I have a website, which is also plantbasedkids.uk. And I've got some free resources on there. So if families want to look up a little bit more or read a bit more about the supplements and how much are recommended for different ages and things like that, I've got a free supplement guide on there. And I've got some other free resources as well. I'm busy building a brand new website, so that should be available in the next few weeks or so. But it is still available with the resources, but it's going to be new and improved very soon.
Amazing. Thanks so much for coming on the podcast, and thank you for everything you're doing. I think you're doing amazing work, and I'm looking forward to diving in more as my own children grow up.
Yeah, brilliant. Well, thank you so much for having me. It's been an absolute pleasure, and I've really, really enjoyed it.